Before we get into the meals themselves, I want to ground you in the reality these families lived in, because context matters. This wasn't rationing as most people casually understand it today. This was isolation so complete that supply lines vanished, markets collapsed, and entire households survived on whatever they could grow, scavenge, trade, or quietly stretch beyond all reasonable limits. No relief trucks, no guaranteed rations, no second chances. What kept people alive were not recipes in the modern sense, but systems of survival disguised as meals. If you study these foods closely, you start to see patterns that are directly applicable to modern preparedness, especially for long-term grid-down or siege-like conditions. That's what we're doing here, and we're jumping straight into substance. This first meal shows how starch became the backbone of survival when flour disappeared. Potato peel bread emerged across occupied Eastern Europe and parts of Germany when real flour became unobtainable. Families washed peels carefully, dried them near stoves or in weak winter sunlight, then ground them into a coarse powder. Mixed with a small amount of rye or barley flour, or sometimes none at all, this dough baked into dense, bitter loaves that still delivered calories and a sense of routine. The key lesson here is not nostalgia, it's waste elimination. In a modern survival context, this teaches you to treat byproducts as primary resources. If you grow potatoes today, practice saving peels, dehydrating them, and testing how they behave as flour extenders before you need to rely on them. This next meal proves protein doesn't always come from animals. Acorn mush was a quiet staple in forested regions cut off from livestock and trade. Families gathered acorns in autumn, shelled them, and leached the tannins through repeated boiling or soaking, sometimes over several days. The resulting meal was cooked into a porridge that, while bland, supplied fats and carbohydrates crucial for winter survival. The practical application is obvious and often ignored. Wild food processing knowledge matters more than abundance. Today, you can practice this by learning one local wild starch source thoroughly instead of dabbling in many. This meal shows how soups became calorie delivery systems rather than comfort food. Turnip water soup, common in besieged cities, was built on extreme scarcity. Turnips, their leaves, and sometimes just the skins, were boiled repeatedly, with the liquid saved and reused over days. Each reheating extracted more nutrients. Fat, if available, was added drop by drop. The brilliance here lies in nutrient recycling. Modern preppers often discard broth after cooking. WWII families treated cooking water as food itself. In a long-term outage, reusing cooking liquid dramatically extends nutritional yield. Practice this now by saving vegetable water and using it as the base for future meals. This forgotten meal highlights how weeds quietly replaced vegetables. Nettle and goosefoot stew, actually sustained families who no longer had access to gardens. Nettles were harvested young, blanched to remove the sting, and cooked down with whatever starch was available. Goosefoot, a wild spinach relative, provided minerals when nothing else grew. The takeaway is simple and, honestly, a bit uncomfortable. Edible weeds are not a novelty skill, they're a fallback system. So, learn which 3 edible weeds grow reliably near you, and practice cooking them in normal times, so they don't feel foreign when stress is high. This meal demonstrates how fat was stretched beyond reason. Fried bread crusts soaked in rendered fat became a lifeline when calories were desperately low. Families saved every scrap of grease, clarified it, and reused it until it barely resembled fat at all. Bread ends, or stale crusts, were fried slowly, creating a dense, filling food that slowed starvation. The survival principle here is fat management. In modern preparedness, fats spoil faster than carbs, but they are vital. Learning to render, clarify, and reuse fats safely can, really double their usable lifespan. This meal shows how legumes replaced meat entirely. Pea and bean mash appeared wherever dried legumes could be stored. Beans were soaked, crushed, and cooked into thick pastes that mimicked the satiety of meat. Sometimes sawdust-adjacent fillers like ground husks were added, not for nutrition, but to increase volume. The real lesson here is psychological endurance. Thick, chewable foods increase the feeling of fullness. In preparedness planning, texture matters just as much as calories. So, stock foods that require chewing and slow digestion. This meal reveals how sweetness became strategic, not indulgent. Carrot jam replaced fruit preserves when sugar was scarce. Carrots were cooked down for hours until their natural sugars concentrated, sometimes sweetened with beet syrup. This provided energy and morale during extreme deprivation. For modern application, understand that morale foods are survival tools. Carrots store well, and learning to reduce them into spreads can give you a renewable energy source that doesn't rely on refined sugar. This final meal shows how families planned for silence, not rescue. Barley water with roots and scraps was consumed daily in total isolation zones. Barley was boiled endlessly, with the grains reused until they dissolved. Roots, skins and bones were added when available. This wasn't cuisine, it was continuity. The principle here is long-duration planning. These families assumed no help was coming. Modern preparedness often assumes recovery. Study meals like this to train yourself mentally for sustained self-reliance. If you're serious about understanding how ordinary families survived extraordinary conditions, these meals are not curiosities. They are blueprints. Study them, practice their methods, and adapt them to your environment now, while mistakes are still cheap. If this kind of deep, practical history matters to you, subscribe to The Prepper Historian, share this with someone who thinks preparedness is just gear, and keep these lessons alive before they're forgotten again.